Hey everyone, Yelan just released, and for many of us, that's pretty exciting news. I've actually had access to Yelan for a bit already though, and I've been thoroughly testing her in the highest level content to try and figure out exactly where her power level is and whether or not she's worth pulling for. After all, she's just 5-star Xingqiu, right? Well, considering how good Xingqiu is, just 5-star Xingqiu is a pretty big compliment. But there are obviously issues that Yelan has too, so today I want to review Yelan and discuss everything that you should know about her character before pulling. Just to be clear, this is not a build guide. I'll be uploading that later, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to watch it when it goes live. Also, this video is entirely my opinion based on the time I spent with Yelan on the content creator exclusive media server, but a lot of it is also backed by numbers and research. That being said, anything that I say that's negative about Yelan is not a personal attack on you, so please try not to be offended if I say something you don't like, and remember, I'm attempting to be as unbiased as possible. Anyways, with all that being said, my name is Braxophone, and this is my in-depth Yelan review. Yelan is an interesting case. We haven't had many characters share nearly the exact same burst as each other, but because it's with Xingqiu, Yelan automatically has to be a decent unit. But since her burst itself isn't super unique, I want to talk about her other skills. Her normal attack animations are awesome, but her normals also have an ability. Once you've been out of combat for 5 seconds, Yelan can shoot one charged attack almost instantly after aiming. That charged attack will deal AoE damage, and it hits pretty dang hard. After that comes her skill, which is super cool. If you've ever played Apex Legends, the character Wraith has an ability that turns her invisible, invincible, and makes her run super fast. Yelan's skill does 2 of those things. She goes invisible and starts sprinting at hedgehog speeds. Maybe that's why she has the ring around her wrist. When you come into contact with enemies, it marks them, and they blow up whenever you leave invisibility for hard-hitting hydro damage. Each enemy marked has a 34% chance of resetting her barbed charge shot, and overall, I really like the ability. Yelan also has a passive that's completely unique to her, where she'll give your on-field damage dealer an increasing damage buff for the duration of her burst. It can get all the way up to 50% damage by the end, and it adds a lot of value to Yelan as a supporting unit. It also doesn't reset ever until her burst is over. So you can switch around all you want and you'll still have the growing bonus. It's unconditionally good. Also, all of her damage except for her basic attacks scales off of her HP, meaning that she's super easy to build and attack stats don't really matter. Overall, despite Yelan having similarities with a character or two, her kit is a breath of fresh air with how unique a lot of her abilities are. As an off-field damage dealer and support, she really excels. So when I was doing Abyss runs, I ended up testing out 2 different builds. One was with Aqua Simulacra, and one was with Favonius Warbow. When testing Aqua, I had to use double hydro or a battery to make sure that I could get my burst up, so it was pretty limited flexibility, but the damage was higher. It was around 15 to 20% higher using Aqua than Favonius with my setup. With Aqua, I could consistently hit 7 to 8k on each hit of her burst, meaning all 3 would hit between 21 and 24k per proc. All things considered, that damage is pretty good. And with Favonius not far behind, it's safe to say that as far as Xingqiu is concerned, Yelan is pretty awesome. As far as skill damage, even with an emblem build focused on energy recharge, Yelan could still hit 20 to 30k per enemy with her skill. Her skill damage feels pretty solid in general, and these numbers are virtually without any buffs at all. With buffs, she's a bit crazier, though her burst doesn't snapshot, so it's not really worth trying most of the time. But overall, Yelan's damage is really solid, and she doesn't really fall behind other units in similar roles of hydro application. But there are some caveats to this, such as energy recharge, which I want to go over right now. Energy recharge is where Yelan sort of falls off in my opinion. In my Yelan guide releasing within a day or so of this video, I mentioned some pretty high energy recharge requirements. Surprisingly, the energy recharge requirements I list are actually on the lower end, assuming you have a lot of enemies to get particles from. In a situation with 3 enemies, no Favonius Warbow or Sacrificial Bow, no double hydro or battery, and 1 elemental skill per rotation, Yelan needs roughly 300% energy recharge to get her burst up consistently. And nobody wants to put that much energy recharge recharge on a character because it takes away from their other stats. You can circumvent her energy needs with a Favonius Warbow or running double Hydro, but even in those scenarios, you'll find you still want at least 200% energy recharge, unless you're running with Xingqiu with Sacrificial Sword, in which case you only really need around 160%. But either way, Yelan is energy hungry like Xingqiu, but generates less particles than him. And for reference, Xingqiu generates 5 and Yelan generates 4. Now you may be wondering, why not just use her skill twice per rotation then? It's on a 10-second cooldown. Well, for most players, that's not really an issue. You can use her skill twice per rotation, and it makes her need a little bit less energy recharge. But for players who optimize and also try to clear Abyss Floor 12, you're probably going to run into trouble giving Yelan that field time, especially if you have characters on your team that have infusion abilities. It takes a few seconds to switch on, use her skill, wait for the switch timer, and switch back, and that's all time that you could be dealing damage or re-upping your support's bursts. Basically what I'm saying is that using her skill twice per rotation is pretty inconvenient, even if it does look cool. Again, for more casual players, this probably isn't really an issue, and to be honest, most players I know not doing Abyss don't really care about the energy recharge thing anyways, but if there's one bottleneck to Yelan's kit, it's energy. Luckily for us though, her teams are fairly flexible, so you do have that freedom to try to generate energy for her in different ways. Speaking of team flexibility, let's talk about it. As stated before, Yelan is functionally similar to Xingqiu. Since Xingqiu can be played in most teams and be valuable, so can Yelan. And Yelan actually is pretty valuable for that reason. If you weren't able to run two teams that needed Xingqiu before, now you can do both. She's great in Pyro carry teams like Yoimiya, Diluc, and Xiangling, and with Xingqiu she can also work with Hu Tao as well. She's also amazing in Taser setups, which is a pretty free-to-play friendly and powerful team. On top of that, due to her damage boosting passive, characters that ramp up damage become even better. For example, Eula's burst requires her to build stacks to deal a lot of damage. So with Eula being on the field towards the end of the passive's effect, her burst gets a pretty big damage bonus. She can also be played in freeze teams. To be honest, I don't really like Xingqiu and Yelan in freeze because I think Kokomi just does it better, but in general for freeze teams where you're on-field basic attacking, she's pretty strong and will definitely make those teams better. Overall, Yelan's pretty versatile and fits into a lot of teams. For players who don't have a lot of characters, Yelan can still most likely work with whoever you have, and that makes her incredibly flexible. But how free-to-play friendly is she? Well, we're going to talk about that right now. Of all of the recent characters released in Genshin, Yelan might be the most free-to-play friendly one. What do I mean by free-to-play friendly? Well, partially I'm referring to her amazing team flexibility, but the other part I'm referring to is her weapon selection. Yelan actually doesn't have that many bows you want to use in the grand scheme of things. A lot of the time, using her signature weapon means you won't actually be able to get her burst up off cooldown. However, after beating Storm Terror in the main story, you get a 4-star gacha bow for free, and that bow is Favonius Warbow. In my opinion, Favonius Warbow is the best free-to-play option for Yelan in the game. As mentioned earlier, Yelan doesn't need attack at all for her skill and burst. Her kit scales off of HP, which means the base attack of weapons doesn't really matter. Because of that, all you have to care about is your weapon's main stat and passive. And Favonius Warbow is really solid for that. With Favonius, you get a ton of energy recharge, but it also generates extra particles when Yelan crits on field. With this weapon being free and still getting decent damage, while also working towards fixing Yelan's energy issues, it makes building Yelan easy, even for free-to-play players. For that reason, and again, team flexibility reasons, Yelan ends up being a super free-to-play friendly unit. Is Yelan just another Xingqiu? Despite their haircuts, that's not quite the case. Though they fit into similar teams and their bursts are functionally the same, there's a couple key differences. When Xingqiu uses his burst, you get rain swords around you that do two things. One, they apply Hydro to enemies who come in contact with you for better Hydro application, and two, they give you damage reduction and stagger resistance. The damage reduction on Xingqiu is something that a lot of players take for granted, but if you start playing Yelan instead of Xingqiu, you'll definitely notice the lack of it. Xingqiu's damage reduction makes him great for teams like Taser, where you either have no shield or a fairly weak shield. It gives your on-field damage dealer a bit of a safety net, and honestly, it's just pretty nice. When the swords disappear, he also heals a bit, so he has that utility as well. Yelan, on the other hand, is more focused on dishing out damage. Not only is her damage higher than Xingqiu's at equal investment, her second passive that increases your on-field character's damage makes her a tool for clearing content fast, which I do want to distinguish right now is not the same as speedrunning content. Yelan's not actually good for speedruns. But maybe Yelan's philosophy is they can't hurt you if they're dead. I mean, that's pretty solid logic. Yelan also has access access to Elegy for the end for its energy recharge and elemental mastery buffing, which works great in pyro teams. Xingqiu unfortunately does not have that. Both characters are great in their own regard. You can definitely treat Yelan like a second Xingqiu since she fits into many of the same teams, but you may find that in something like Taser, you'd still prefer Xingqiu over Yelan for damage reduction and healing. It's possible if you're one of those players that doesn't feel like they need a second Xingqiu, that Yelan won't actually be a pull that you want to make, but it is worth noting that they do separate things. But now that we've gone over sort of everything there is to talk about with Yelan, let's talk about whether or not she's worth the pull. So we've said all of the good about Yelan. What about the bad? Well, aside from energy recharge, there isn't really a bad. Yelan's damage is solid. She applies Hydro, which is the best element in the game, despite there not being a lot of them that aren't healers. She's a bow user that can use Elegy. Her skill is cool. Her burst gives your on-field units a damage bonus. She really just has so much good about her. That being said, you may not feel like you need another Xingqiu, and that's fine. Not everyone wants two characters whose bursts do similar things, and if that's you, then I actually don't recommend going for her. But she provides a different utility from Xingqiu in damage bonus with her other abilities, and I think that makes her pretty solid. At the beginning of the video, I said people see Yelan as just 5-star Xingqiu, but the thing is, Xingqiu is already one of the best units in the entire game by a long shot. This happened a while ago with Sucrose and Kazuha too. People called Kazuha 5-star Sucrose and a bunch of people skipped him. Now Yelan is different from Kazuha because Kazuha is a universal support that can make any team clear any content as long as they're not Mono Geo or Mono Animo. Kazuha's buffs are broken and Viridescent Venerer is broken and he has really short cooldowns and everything about Kazuha is kind of broken. Yelan isn't quite that strong, but she's absolutely an amazing unit. Even if she did only as much damage as Xingqiu, she'd still be good for the Hydro application and damage, since Xingqiu's damage is already good on its own. It's also worth noting that though her best artifact set is 4-piece Emblem, and I'll explain that in my guide, Emblem is a super efficient set to farm for because so many characters with different stat priorities need it. Overall, I think Yelan is a great unit that adds a lot to the Genshin roster, and I would say she is a great pull. But before you go pull, also consider this. It's highly likely we'll see Kazuha return soon since there's a summer patch coming up and he's due for a rerun anyways. If there's a continuation of the Inazuma storyline or any involvement with Scaramouche, you can assume Kazuha will be there. And though no unit in this game is truly a must pull, if there was going to be one, in my opinion it would be Kazuha. You have a few weeks to find out from leaks whether or not Kazuha is truly confirmed for a rerun, so if you're skeptical, I would just wait. Yelan's not going anywhere for a bit. But also, if you just don't really care about Kazuha at all, if you already have him, or if you just don't like the character, then Yelan's a pretty good pull anyways. Hopefully this video helped. It was mostly a stew of my thoughts on Yelan and my experience with her, so don't take any of what I said as the absolute truth always all the time. It's possible you may have different experiences with the character. If this video did help you though, I'd appreciate if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Also, let me know in the comments if you're pulling for Yelan. I'll see y'all later on my Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone for some Genshin Impact and Star Rail content. I'll catch you later, gamers. See ya!